Matthew 17, descending to shaded dust. The dawn light did not warm the observation deck of the ridgeline lookout. It merely sliced through the heavy alpine fog, turning the gray mist into a blinding, luminous white that made Julian squint as he leaned his forearms against the timber railing. Below them, thousands of feet down the sheer rock face, the sprawling valley basin remained caught in a deep, purple shadow, completely hidden from the clarity of the peak. Julian took a slow drink from his thermal mug, the steam rising to meet his weathered face, before he turned his head to look at the younger man standing beside him. Elias was staring out over the edge, his hands shoved deep into the pockets of his heavy field jacket, his face pale from weeks of uninterrupted exhaustion. "I don't want to go down there today, Julian," Elias whispered, his voice catching slightly on the sharp mountain air. "Up here, everything is clean. The air doesn't smell like survival, and you can actually see where the horizon ends. I feel like Peter standing on that high mountain, watching the garments turn as white as light. It makes sense why he wanted to put up 3 tents right there on the dirt. He wasn't being lazy. He just realized that staying in a space where God's presence feels brilliant and uncontaminated is better than going back to the crowds." Julian let out a quiet, rhythmic breath that turned to vapor between them. It's a deeply human instinct to try and turn a brief spiritual milestone into a permanent bunker, Elias. We want to capture the light, build walls around it, and call it a sanctuary. But look closer at the sequence of that movement. While Peter was still trying to draft blueprints for his tabernacles, a bright cloud completely overshadowed them, and the Father's voice didn't mention an architecture plan. The mandate from heaven was devastatingly simple. "This is my beloved Son, with whom I am well pleased. Listen to him." The voice didn't tell them to settle on the ridge. It commanded absolute submission to the person of Christ. And the very first thing Christ does when they open their eyes is tell them to stand up, stop being afraid, and start walking back down the trail. Elias pulled his hands from his pockets and reached down to tighten the laces on his heavy leather hiking boots, his movements stiff and reluctant. "But the whiplash is brutal," he muttered, shouldering his field pack with a sharp grunt as they stepped off the observation deck and onto the rocky, narrow switchbacks that led down into the shaded valley timber. "We've spent 6 months working with the behavioral trauma in the urban center, and half the time it feels like we're screaming into a void. My team is completely broken, Julian. We look at the chaos of these broken families, the generational anger, and we feel utterly powerless to fix any of it. Which makes you an exact mirror of the 9 disciples left waiting at the base of the mountain," Julian said, his boots crunching rhythmically on the loose shale as he led the way down the steep incline. "Think about the scene they walked into the moment they hit the valley floor. A desperate father is on his knees, begging for mercy because his son is seizing violently, being thrown into the fire and the water by a demonic affliction that the disciples couldn't cast out. Jesus looks at his own team and laments an unbelieving and perverse generation. They had the authority, Elias. They had seen the miracles, but the moment they were faced with a violent, deeply entrenched crisis, their certainty froze into panic. "Why did they fail?" Elias asked, stepping carefully over an exposed pine root, his breath coming faster now, under the weight of his pack. "They had faith. They had stagnant certainty, which isn't the same thing," Julian replied, stopping at a small clearing where the trail leveled off into a dense, quiet forest where the sunlight struggled to break through the thick canopy of fir trees. When they asked him privately why they couldn't move the entity, he didn't tell them they had no faith. The NASB and LSB use a very specific diagnostic term, oligopistia, the littleness of your faith. It means their trust was frozen by the severity of the symptoms around them. They were looking at the water and the fire instead of the source. Jesus tells them that if they have faith the size of a mustard seed, they can tell the mountain to move from here to there, and nothing will be impossible. Elias leaned his back against a massive cedar trunk, wiping a bead of sweat from his forehead. "A mustard seed is microscopic, Julian. How does that help when you're looking at a mountain of systemic failure? Because a mustard seed isn't praised for its small size. It's praised because it is a living, expanding entity that dynamically breaks through the dirt to fulfill its purpose," Julian said, turning to look Elias directly in the eyes. "It is the exact opposite of paralyzed panic. True operational faith means putting that tiny grain into immediate motion under Christ's authority, stepping directly into the obstacle instead of standing paralyzed on the ridge. It's like Moses at the Red Sea in Exodus 14. He gave a magnificent, faithful-sounding speech about standing still to see the deliverance of the Lord, and God immediately rebuked him. "Why are you crying out to me? Tell the Israelites to move on." True faith doesn't stand still delivering theological platitudes in a crisis, Elias. It stretches its hand out over the water and holds it there all night until the landscape changes. Elias unbuckled his waist strap, his gaze falling to the damp earth. It just feels like every single time we get a moment of real clarity or joy up on the peak, it's immediately cut short by a return to hardship. It's always followed by a personal cost that leaves you bleeding. Julian unclipped his canteen, taking a short sip before hooking it back to his belt. If that reality frustrates you, then you are going to struggle with the heart of the Messiah, because that is the exact point where the timeline of chapter 17 takes its darkest turn. Right after they left the crowd in the valley, while they were gathering together in Galilee, Jesus didn't give them a celebratory lecture about the demon he just cast out. He systematically pulled their focus away from the triumphant mountaintop light and forced them to look at an execution. He told them clearly, "The Son of Man is going to be betrayed into the hands of men, and they will kill him, and he will be raised on the third day." Why would he do that? Elias asked, his voice raw. Why reveal the absolute, unadulterated glory of heaven on the peak, only to immediately broadcast his own murder the moment they hit the trail? Because true spiritual authority in the kingdom of God does not use heavenly glory as an escape hatch from human suffering, Julian said softly, his voice carrying the deep weight of a man who had walked through his own valleys. The disciples were deeply distressed because they couldn't reconcile a king who shines like the sun with a servant who is delivered into the hands of corrupt men. But Jesus was demonstrating that his identity is inseparable from his passion, his voluntary submission to physical suffering and death. He didn't enter this world to rule from an isolated mountain outpost, Elias. He marched deliberately toward the cross to pay a redemptive ransom in the dirt. If we are going to follow him, we cannot use our ministry as a way to avoid the cross. They walked in silence for the final mile, the timberline dropping away entirely as the path opened up into the gravel parking lot where their dirty field vehicle was parked. Elias dropped his pack into the truck bed, pulling his tablet out from the front seat to check his network notifications. Within seconds, his face hardened, his jaw clenching as he stared at the glowing screen. "I don't believe this," Elias spat, holding the tablet out toward Julian. "The local municipal office just flagged our urban youth center with a retroactive administrative fee and a building assessment tax. It's an aggressive, bureaucratic overreach from a secular board that doesn't want us in the neighborhood. I'm going to call our legal trustee before we even drive out of here. We have a clear right to an exemption on strict institutional principles, and I'm ready to fight them on it." Julian didn't look at the screen. He simply placed a hand on the top of the truck door, looking over the roof at his younger colleague. When they arrived in Capernaum, the collectors of the 2 drachma temple tax approached Peter and asked if his teacher paid the assessment. Peter said yes without thinking, but before he could even bring it up inside the house, Jesus intercepted him with a question about sovereignty. He asked, "From whom do the kings of the earth collect duties or taxes? From their own children or from foreigners?" Elias paused, his thumb hovering over his phone screen. Peter answered that kings collect from foreigners, and Jesus told him that the children are exempt. "Exactly," Julian said, nodding toward the open Bible resting on the truck dashboard. As the unique Son of the living God, the temple was his Father's house, meaning Jesus held absolute cosmic exemption from the tax. He owed them nothing. He had the sovereign authority to dismiss the collection entirely. But look at the paradox of the miracle he performs next. "However, so that we do not offend them, go to the sea, cast a hook, and take the first fish you catch. Open its mouth, and you will find a 4 drachma coin. Take it and give it to them for me and for you." The same Lord who commands the winds, shines with uncreated light on the peak, and drives out ancient entities in the valley, chooses to use his sovereign power over creation to pull a coin from a fish's mouth just to pay a tax he doesn't owe. Elias lowered the tablet, looking out toward the dusty road that led back to the city. He surrendered his legal rights. He voluntarily relinquished his immunity to avoid causing a stumble, Elias. True citizens of the kingdom do not manifest divine sovereignty through aggressive institutional rebellion or shouting about our rights in a secular court. We manifest it through voluntary submission and quiet provision. Jesus didn't fight the tax collectors, and he didn't fight the men who arrested him in the garden. He submitted to the lower authorities of this world to show that his kingdom belongs to another realm entirely. Julian opened the driver's side door, turning back with a quiet smile. Put the tablet away, Elias. Let's get down into the valley. We have some fishing to do.